Coming up, breaking news as Kadarius Toney is traded from the New York Football Giants to the Kansas City Chiefs for a reported third and sixth round pick. We break down what it means in the short term for the Giants. What could this turn into for Joe Schoen? And what happened with Kadarius Toney as a New York Football Giant? Let's get into it next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant podcast with breaking news coverage, as we like to do whenever we can. I got to tell you, friends, we're obviously going to talk about what is just a seismic shift for the New York Football Giants from the previous regime into this one. I'm going to tip myself a little bit of a cap here along the way. But just to be clear, welcome into the live stream over on YouTube. If you're a part of it, we appreciate you, Tommy and Marty and Beefinito, who's been in here, obviously already starting the conversation ahead of time. I was literally sitting down for lunch, walked into town, sat down at one of my favorite little spots, getting some street tacos, squeezing on some lime juice. All of a sudden, the Twitter timeline starts to blow up, and here we go, right? The reason why I say, so we'll just go ahead and lay this out here. First reported over on Twitter, want to make sure that we also get this right, just in terms of where this first came from. Jordan Renan also provided some context for this trade news, but first reported, by Jordan Schultz. The first breaking news element that came through was on him. We almost had a little bit of a sense of, is this true? I think Giants, there was another couple outlets that picked it up and put it out there on Twitter. Certainly got you questioning a little bit. Maybe it's a gag. Are we talking about playing here a little bit? Then it gets confirmed by reputable sources, starts to snowball, and it is, in fact, official. So a conditional third round pick and a sixth round pick from the Kansas City Chiefs in exchange for Kadarius Toney. Let's take a deep breath, because I know that I'm talking a mile a minute right now. What does it mean as Floyd is in on the conversation? Jerry Jeudy potentially. Other people talking about DJ Moore, right? What is going to happen on the back end of this? I'm of two minds here. First and foremost, we understand Kadarius Toney comes in on the previous regime, a first-round pick. Some people questioned at the time if that was the value there in the early 20s, especially when you had Jacksonville, who was in love with the idea of going and drafting Kadarius Toney, and maybe you could have moved back. Okay, said and done, put it to bed. It is what it is. Now you come into this new regime, and this previous draft class, when the New York Football Giants drafted Wan'Dale Robinson, I feel at least comfortable being able to be a little bit excited about the fact that at the time I said, this is your Kadarius Toney replacement, because the new regime wants their version of that guy. And even though we speculated along the way, can Toney get healthy? Can he get out there on the field? At the end of the day, the culture shift, the scheme, the coaching staff, the mentality, everything that we talk about what Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, and this coaching staff want to instill and cement for this team, that's what I think you look at a Wan'Dale Robinson, you get excited about, even though he's had his injury concerns here, obviously, to start his career. And it's everything about Kadarius Toney that there was some level of red flags. And I'm not going to drag Toney over the coals here. You didn't want to be a part of this, that's okay. Or you've had difficulty with injuries, and that makes it hard for this regime to get behind you. That's okay too. Ultimately, man, I think that this is a win-win from both sides. And I know about what is going to happen here as we see D3C3 coming into the conversation saying, sick to my stomach about the talent, right? Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted. Within 2 weeks, Kadarius Toney will most likely be on the field for Kansas City, and he will look as dynamic as he did in that very small sample size we got over his New York Giants career, especially that Dallas Cowboys game, right? Inevitably it's going to happen. So you got to put your mind to rest about that part of it. He is still an elite talent, I think, at least on paper. And if he gets out there on the field, you're going to see the Kansas City Chiefs take an enormous step forward in terms of what that offense looks like, getting back to the Tyreek Hill dynamic playmaker, creating mismatches, and being a really potent offense as they move down the stretch. They understand Kansas City, by the way, that they had to go make a move like this because the Bills are the top of the class right now in the AFC. So they had to make a move here. They had to do something to shift that power a little bit. Shout out to Jonathan, man. Thank you so much for throwing that up there. We really appreciate this level of support as we'll make a little brief adjustment on our layout here since I'm flying solo. Let's get it up here in front of the big screen. Gosh darn it. Setup is rickety at best here. Really appreciate it though. This S, thank you very much for blocking out the profanities. We appreciate that as well. Pissed me off. Why can't we ever keep the electrified playmakers? Listen, I know exactly what you mean, and I see with the comical laugh at the end of it, right? I get it, man, because again, he's going to go be productive, Kadarius Toney. He's just not going to be doing it for us. I think that he was behind the 8 ball, right? And you see G getting in on this conversation too in the chat. Had problems in college, just from a health, purely from a health standpoint. Injuries are something that have followed Kadarius Toney from his college career into the pros. And I said this at the time, and this is about Kadarius Toney and any player, every player. And let me just be self-deprecating here too. There are players that we were wrong about this offseason. We are shocked in a great way that Julian Love went from being this holdover that you weren't sure about his fit to being an important leader on this defensive unit. And that is absolutely fantastic. But I said, when a new GM comes in, when a new regime starts, it doesn't matter where you were drafted. The first round draft pick couldn't mean any less to Joe Schoen. It wasn't his draft capital. He didn't choose to spend it that way. And we also talked about the time how he felt about it when I speculated maybe, and there was that rumor over the course of the offseason, wasn't a lot of traction to it about could Kadarius Toney be moved. It doesn't matter that the New York Giants, spent a high first-round draft pick, or first-round draft pick, I should say, on Kadarius Toney. I didn't spend that draft pick if I'm Joe Schoen. I didn't allocate that money to him if I'm Joe Schoen. It matters if he's productive and if he fits what we want to do, what Brian Daboll wants to do, what Mike Kafka wants to do. And we get it, right? Mike Kafka came from Kansas City. So the idea that we're taking him from the Giants and sending him to the former offensive coordinator's team and saying, hey, this player that we want to move on from is the perfect fit for, in theory, the system that we are going to have big elements of as it continues to unfold here. So there is no shortage of disappointment around this in terms of what he could have been. But ultimately, at the end of the day, and I'm not going to speculate on any of this as far as what it meant from health. Was he truly healthy? Did he really have injuries? Did he not want to be a part of this new regime and what looked like maybe a rebuild? And just to reiterate here for Tommy, 3rd round conditional pick from the Kansas City Chiefs, 6th round pick from the Kansas City Chiefs in exchange for Kadarius Toney, just 1 year after being a 1st round draft pick. Whether or not Kadarius Toney was fully healthy or capable of being healthy or capable of getting out there, we've seen the Giants be extra cautious around injuries. The one thing I'll say is no one expected the Giants to be as good as they have been this year. No one expected them to be 6-1. So if Kadarius Toney was having a difficult time getting himself onto the practice field, getting himself in training camp, the offseason program, showing a level of commitment and dedication to a team that in theory was coming off a bad season and looking down the road of another bad season, guess what? That's okay. You go ahead and sit on the side until you're ready to be a part of this team. And then as you start winning without him, as the team starts growing without him, it's a lot easier for the organization to be able to part ways. And maybe it's a lot easier when Kadarius Toney is maybe saying, I'm getting closer. I'm ready to get back out there, to say, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But guess what? Wan'Dale Robinson's ready to get back out there. And we're already starting to see glimpses of what his production can look like. I was happy to have Kadarius Toney on this roster. Not sure what it's going to look like or how quickly it's going to look like that in Kansas City. Other questions that this brings up then. The first one being, what did it mean financially for the New York Football Giants to move on from Kadarius Toney here? Because if we're talking about, as the sirens go off in the background, if anyone can hear it, that's the town is celebrating this trade. If Kadarius Toney has been moved on from, does it mean, one, that it's simply about he's not a part of our long-term future, and the off-season value for Kadarius Toney is not going to be as high as it may be right now. So you try to maximize value. That's one element of it. The other element of it is, if you're Joe Schoen and you're considering the idea of where do we go as a team at the trade deadline, trying to improve and trying to bolster our roster for a playoff run. Now, just in case you're wondering, the New York Football Giants, it's not a big move here. Like, I know a lot of people are saying, well, you do free up some extra cap money, but it's not this seismic, um, it's not a seismic shift here. It's year number 2 of a rookie contract. So in this season, he was base salary of 1.283 million. A prorated bonus came in at 1.8, and the total cap hit was 3.11 million. This is all per over the cap. Sometimes you look over at Spot Track and you can find some different numbers here. But traded on a post June 1, we are talking about, which is the area that we find ourselves in, taking on some level potentially of dead cap here, dead money and cap savings. It looks like here in 2022, 1.8 in dead cap, 1.2 in cap savings. Now, how much of that has already been paid and how those numbers get adjusted a little bit, we'll go over that as things unfold here just in the next couple of days. So, digesting this in real time. So it's not necessarily making a big shift. Now, the cap money counts now, and the dead cap money, that'll be for tomorrow's issues, right? So you do have a little bit of flexibility there. I'm more curious about who are the Giants considering. We said here at the top, just to reiterate it for everybody coming in on the live stream here on our YouTube channel, One Giant Podcast, breaking down the Kadarius Toney trade from the New York Football Giants to the Kansas City Chiefs, conditional 3rd round pick and 6th round selection. What do they want to turn this into, right? Because now, one of the things that we were debating just as early as yesterday was, if there's moves to be made, how much is Joe Schoen willing to part with? All of a sudden, with an extra conditional 3rd round pick in your arsenal, you can maybe get a little bit more flexible. You may be willing to commit draft capital knowing, hey, is 6th round pick the perfect asset to have? Maybe not. We saw what it can turn into. We're excited to see Darian Beavers get back out there next year. But ultimately, if there's an opportunity that maybe requires spending a 2nd round pick, Jerry Jeudy comes to mind. That seems to be the price range that we're talking about. The DJ Moore one, I think, is still too rich for the New York Football Giants, too rich for Joe Schoen to commit to. But a 2nd round pick for Jerry Jeudy, when you have 2 3rd round picks now, there's a little bit of flexibility there. You can start to massage yourself about saying, okay, we're giving up draft capital in next year's draft, but we feel like with the way our scouting department works underneath Joe Schoen, we'll find talent in the draft that we can replace them with. I'm not 1,000% sold that just because this trade happened, it means that the Giants are going to make a corresponding move. Andy has talked a lot about tight end being the position that should go and target. I've brought up Josh Reynolds before as the low-cost buy. I think that this certainly makes it possible for the Giants to target a slightly higher level or more established receiver, and one in theory, like when we talk about a Jerry Jeudy, still very young. He's had some drop issues here, and that's, I think, the interesting thing too. In the hierarchy here, it's why DJ Moore's price tag is so much greater than in Jerry Jeudy's, in theory, from what we've heard. Because DJ Moore is a dynamic playmaker that can be that guy for you. But again, I don't know, and we're seeing there as Sci Guy gets in, there was an article out today talking about a potential target for the New York Football Giants at the tight end position. We'll talk about him here in a second as well. But it's hard for me to think that the New York Football Giants, understanding you have the upcoming draft and you have the offseason, to give up that much draft capital for DJ Moore. It's not, to me, that's not going to happen. Now, a 2nd round pick for Jerry Jeudy, maybe. I still don't even find that as likely as it being a marginal move, picking up a couple of pieces. But one thing that we were going to talk about earlier today, and then things got a little bit shuffled here, was that we saw the Dallas Cowboys go out and get Jonathan Hankins from the Raiders. We saw Quinn now from the Bears go over to the Eagles. Teams inside of the division with big winning records, undefeated and otherwise, are bolstering their roster here, right? Bolstering their roster for the playoff run and the playoff push. The question we had was, are the Giants going to look at how this season is unfolding and say, here's our chance to go in and make that push right now? Or where they first came in with the new regime saying, long road ahead, it's not a 1-year process. I think there can be a blend of that here, but it's hard for me to say that the Giants are going to push all their chips in and on this particular season, right? On this particular moment. And a guy like Jerry Jeudy, even though he would certainly be an improvement to the wide receiver core, there are still enough questions there that, I think you say, yes, he can be dynamic. He can improve this offense. But is he a guy you want to be committed to long term? I think that that's going to be a part of this. Just looking over there, Marty, who we always appreciate being in on the chat. Mike Gesicki, and I see someone else mention this. Dolphins, see, a couple of weeks ago, there was some rumblings. Would it work out? Would it not work out? He's now caught 14 balls over the past 2 weeks. Tua is back under center. You have wide receivers there. Gesicki is such a good tight end to have to further help free up your dynamic tandem at the wide receiver position. So I don't see that being a viable option here necessarily. Stranger things happen, right? Not that Kadarius Toney is a high-profile name in terms of production on the field, but it was out of left field in terms of not hearing any rumors about this over the last week or two. Really, nothing came up here about Kadarius Toney. It was that nursing his third hamstring injury of the year, trying to get himself back healthy. Maybe you'd see him come back after the bye week, trying to get a little bit more flexibility to wide receiver position, a little bit more depth. Dan asking, does this help our money situation? So again, just to reiterate, when you go over to look at the over the cap, the money on this, he was only on the books for 3.1 million this season. Now, I don't know, full transparency, the post trade June 1 trade, which you can look at and say, okay, if you trade him after this point, this is what it means. But we're now 6 weeks into the season. So some level of his salary is also being accounted for here over those first 6 weeks. But 1.8 million in dead, 1.28 million in cap savings. So the dead money isn't going to hurt you in terms of your flexibility financially right now in this moment. But how much of that money really exists there now at this point, 7 weeks into the season? That's what we need to determine and get a little bit more information on. The short answer is Kadarius Toney didn't represent a big cap hit right now. He's on his rookie contract, right? So no, it does not free up a substantial amount of money, right? This is not the Kenny Golladay one, which we all know was going to hurt them massively on the cap and the dead cap scenario if they moved off of him. Interestingly enough, what we wondered about too, I think we talked about this last few podcasts, was is it just about allocating assets in a trade, or, and this would have been a difficult one to do with a competitive team like the Kansas City Chiefs, but teams that are looking like they're falling out of the playoff picture, can you make an exchange on a player for player and reduce the cost of the draft capital that you surrender in a trade? That was something else that we kind of want to look around. I think the hard part for the Giants this season is they've been so hurt. There's been so many injuries that have stacked up here that it becomes a little bit tricky. The other factor inside of this, in terms of how are they going to use this, right? We also know too, and I want to get back into here to Albert, talking about Albert. And we all know that there's just no world where I get this correct here on the first attempt. But we're going to bring him up, and this is because out in Denver, they drafted a tight end. They have their guy, a new regime, new quarterback in Russell Wilson, all of those good things. And now, whether or not this particular tight end actually has value to them, or it's just one of those things, you're not our guy, you're not our fit, not unlike the New York Football Giants right now. Let's get ourselves in there and talk about the tight end room. Oh, where is he there? I'm going to pull up this article here too in the background. So keep the conversation going as we roll through this here. Let's just take a look over at Tommy. The way that we draft is undisciplined. No worries. Keep all of our equity and keep developing talent from the street are producing for us. Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. So I get your sentiment there, Tommy. But the first part that you said there, the way that we draft is undisciplined. I agree with that up until this year. I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it with Joe Schoen. I don't agree with what he did in this draft. Now there's been injuries, but we're already talking about Evan Neal. We're talking about that glimmer when it came to Darian Beavers. We're talking about Daniel Bellinger, right? We're talking about several players. Wan'Dale Robinson. The draft record, very, very short, looks like it's going to be pretty successful. Previous regimes were a disaster, and that's why cutting ties with Kadarius Toney makes it a little bit easier. Let's take a look here. They are stacking draft picks to make a move for quarterback next year. We can go down that road, Kyle. I think it's perfectly reasonable, to wonder about the totality of this in the big picture. We'll briefly talk about that now before we get into the micro. What can we do with this? Where can we go from here? I think having draft capital matters for the New York Football Giants, right? They're going to have their first round draft pick. Now, they're going to also probably need to spend, if you need to move up in the draft, you're going to have to spend another first round draft pick down the road. But having multiple threes matters. Having multiple sixes matters, just from the standpoint of we have capital to continue to fill out our roster. I don't, at this moment right now, I'm not worried about that. I think we all know Tommy's talking about, right? Keep Jones. He's the guy. Listen, the sample size we're getting this year on Daniel Jones has been consistently getting incrementally better. I think the question for me personally still remains, is this a product of the system or a product of the quarterback? And as you expand the system, does the quarterback continue to perform at a high level? Right now, this sample size of this season is saying, hey, it looks like we can do that. It looks like Daniel Jones can continue to grow. It looks like the past regime really was doing a number on this young man. Okay. And we can move forward with that. It doesn't hurt, though, to have that flexibility around the moves you potentially want to make. All right, I want to go ahead and pull up here because Andy, who is on a flight right now, actually, from the West Coast, he came in and he provided me the article here. So I'll go ahead and get it pulled up. And this was retweeted out by Jordan Renan, care of Bill Barnwell, who was talking about the New York Football Giants and I think the division overall, 4 teams that could make some interesting moves here. And I'll have to do this on a little bit of a secondary process because that is the nature of trying to absorb all this information in real time and provide everybody with the context here. So let me just go ahead and get inside this one moment. All right. So when we look inside the Bill Barnwell article, he listed a couple of things. Now, he ends up zeroing in on a tight end, but interestingly enough, there are a couple of wide receivers that also got thrown in here as well. So when we get down to the New York Football Giants, as I'm literally, you can see possibly on camera here, scrolling in real time. One other note here, remaining strength of schedule for the New York Football Giants ranks 31st in the NFL. So at 6-1, the, again, equation of do we want to try to push here and improve our team in the short term? That's as good a reason as any to also try to improve this roster in some capacity. But when we get down the list, he ends up going to the tight end room, but first makes mention of players like Kendrick Bourne from the Patriots, Nelson Aguilar. The Broncos are getting calls on Hamler and Jerry Jeudy, neither of whom, as Bill Barnwell reports, are particularly healthy or productive as pros. And that's where it gives me pause around Jerry Jeudy. In theory, I think we're enamored by the name and what it could mean. But that's why there's a difference with DJ Moore and the actual production and true production and consistent production that we've seen on the field. Albert Okwebunam. I'm going to call him Oki, just so we make sure we clean this mess up here. But that would be a potential with Bellinger's injury. It could go in a number of directions, and they listed him as being maybe that target that they could go after. So over on the Broncos, 7 receptions for 50 yards this season. Let's back it up here and talk about his stat lines overall. And again, that he could be the man on the outside looking in. Last season, 14 games played, 33 catches on 40 targets, 330 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 10-yard per clip average, 6'5", 258. So that's really the if you talk about what you've lost and what you have on your roster, I think a move like that makes a lot of sense. And if we're now thinking about adding this capital via the trade, and what do we want to spend? 6th-round pick? How much capital? One of that, the 6th-round pick that you just got back in this trade, send it out to the Denver Broncos, bring in a tight end that you think has some real upside and can be receiver productive for you. And then you still have Hudson. You still have Myrick to help fill out that blocking aspect of things. That's a move that maybe, as much as anything, making a move for a wide receiver could make sense for the New York Football Giants. Let's walk through here just because this is what we're here for. It's a live YouTube stream breaking down the breaking news. Kadarius Toney, conditional 3rd, 6th-round pick from the Kansas City Chiefs for the New York Football Giants, marking Joe Schoen's kind of first, significant move here as the GM of the New York Football Giants, especially an in-season trade, as we know that deadline is looming. We've got Donnie talking about, I think the Giants have forced Joe Schoen's hand. Do you think let's get this one up here. We'll hide my face for a second. I think that the Giants have forced Joe Shane's hand. You've already played out of your QB1 pick. Playoffs are never guaranteed, no matter how good your roster is. He has to make a move for a wide receiver one this year. Um, I understand where I get your point, right? Like, here we are. You've played to a 6-1 record. I would argue that right now in this moment, if you want, you can look at their 6-1 record, and then you can go and look at their remaining schedule. And even being 6-1, nothing is guaranteed for the New York Football Giants. We're going to talk about tomorrow how I think that this Seattle Seahawks game could be a potential loss heading into the bye week. But you come out with Houston, with Detroit, and then you get into a lot of division matchups, right? We're going to see 4 consecutive games in division at Dallas, home for Washington, home for Philly, at Washington, then on the road at the Vikings, at home for the Colts, who could be in a little bit of a dumpster mode here as well, benching Matt Ryan, and then closing out the season at Philadelphia. But here's my point. Just in terms of you need to go do something. Is it required? I don't think it is. Because now if you want to have playoff run expectations, then going and bolstering this roster, yes. Then going and getting maybe what you feel could be a true number one, that matters. However, when you go and look at the standings right now in the NFC, Green Bay's 3-4. So I'm looking at all those wild card spots. Green Bay's 3-4, as are the Chicago Bears. Atlanta is 3-4. The Panthers are done 2-5. I mean, even if they go on a run, I know they got that win. 3-3 are the Rams. 3-4 are the 49ers. The Giants are 6-1. If they win 4 more games, that might be enough to get into, at worst, the last wild card spot. But when you go in and look at some of these, and I think the Green Bay Packers, they could certainly find their rhythm and get themselves back on it, as can the LA Rams. But don't forget, when you go look at the LA Rams schedule, they're on a bye week right now. They come out and play San Francisco. So one of those teams is going to be one loss worse coming out of the bye week. The Buccaneers, who have been a bit of a disaster, the Cardinals, the Saints, the Kansas City Chiefs, and then they're also going to find themselves with Seattle, the Vikings, Green Bay, closing out there with the Denver Broncos, the Chargers, and Seattle again. I don't know how all those games are going to shake out. Now, is it beyond the pale that the Rams can go on a run? Of course not. But let's be clear, they have 3 wins right now. They got a long way to go. They have a long way to go sitting there and looking at their schedule and saying, we have to find a way to win 7, 8 games over the back half of our season. That is not an easy task. It's not an automatic, even if you are the LA Rams, that you're going to turn up over the back half of your season, 11 games, when you need to win 7. Maybe even 8 if you need to secure it. That's a tall order. Most of these teams are in that boat, and most of these teams have to play division opponents, similar teams that are all vying for those wild card spots. I'm not going to be shocked if it ends up being, in whatever order of the NFC East, all 3 top teams here are going to the playoffs, with 2 of them obviously occupying wild card positions. Yes, and by the way, Donnie, 100%. That's another, when we talked about this before, but I'll reiterate this point, and then we'll go ahead and reset the table here on the trade breaking news. New York Football Giants sending Kadarius Toney to the Kansas City Chiefs for a conditional 3rd and 6th round pick. Remember, inside of this hierarchy, the Giants have already beaten Green Bay. They've already beaten the Chicago Bears, if you think that they're still in the mix. They've already beaten the Carolina Panthers, even though they are far further down that list, right? So that matters too in this, because you're already a leg up on 2 teams, specifically Green Bay and Chicago. They got to get one up over you to break that tiebreaker loss that they both have against you. That's going to be a problem. It's why, by the way, that the Seattle game can be somewhat critical, just if you're thinking about in the grand scheme of things. Hey, if we go out and beat Seattle and they start to have that battle there in the NFC West on the back half of this season, the Giants could be sitting here being able to point back to their schedule and say, we beat 3 teams that were in contention for a wild card spot. Yes, we beat all of them. Right. And then we know the division games are going to be absolutely massive in this, obviously, as well. Let's get ourselves back to neutral on this conversation. Kadarius Toney gets traded again. Dynamic playmaker. And by the way, here's another little talking point about this. Because as everyone knows, if you follow the podcast, you know that I am someone who sets a high bar of expectation for Daniel Jones in being able to cement himself as the franchise quarterback going forward. And there's big conversations about franchise quarterback. What is the price point? But one of the things people talk about is if only he had quality wide receivers, if you put elite talent around him. Now, yes, elite wide receivers, elite offensive talent is going to help the quarterback. That is obviously a 1-to-1 ratio. However, I always go back and talk about now Eli Manning had one of his best seasons and went on that second Super Bowl run with Plaxico Burress, and that obviously mattered. But does anyone look at the pantheon of NFL wide receivers and say Amani Toomer? Now, he's a beloved New York Football Giant, but he is not the perfect wide receiver. He was not an elite, Hall of Fame stud, number one guy year in, year out in the league. But rhythm, consistency, continuity, all of those things matter. Our tight ends were never the perfect tight ends when it came to Eli Manning's 2 Super Bowl runs. Victor Cruz showed up and balled out and then went away. Mario Manningham showed up, made key plays when they mattered, and went away. Hakeem Nicks. My point is that when the system is right and the players understand and know how to be productive in the system, then the quarterback elevates the play of those wide receivers. Things get better because you have everyone on the same page. That's always been my point around the wide receiver room and whether or not you need to have true number ones. Do you need to spend high draft capital on a wide receiver? Do you need to go out to the free agency market, God forbid, and spend $20-25 million on a wide receiver with the way things have trended? No. You need to have the right receivers that fit your scheme and fit what you want to do. And that's a lot of what we've seen from the New York Football Giants this season. Obviously, going back to the draft, Wan'Dale Robinson, and I would have expectations about what would happen going into next offseason and next year's draft class and how they'll look to continue to improve this wide receiver room. I saw. I'll throw up here just 66. I call BS on the hamstring. Dable sits you if you are not bought in. Again, another good talking point here, right? And we kind of, what we really did at a certain point on this show was say, dude, until you're on the field, and this is Kadarius Toney or anybody, and even the guys that we love on the team, until you're on the field, there's really no point to talk about you, right? And I said this at the top of the show. He's dealt with injuries. We get that. But I've also said consistently, hamstring injuries oftentimes are a product of preparation, stretching, strength and conditioning. Those things matter. And I've used this example before on the podcast. Chad Ochocinco, famously, I think this was on Hard Knocks years and years ago, was going into McDonald's and grabbing cheeseburgers and living his best life, and then going out and being incredibly productive on the field. But there was a drop-off at some point. Goes into a new system in New England, can't get on the same page, right? At a certain point, natural athleticism and talent is not enough unto itself. You got to be willing to go the extra mile. You have to be willing to put in the extra work. And if Kadarius Toney is a guy who comes into the league and gets a little sniff of how electric he can be and kind of looks at it as, man, watch me on Sundays, don't worry about Monday through Saturday, that wasn't going to fly with this regime. So especially, even if the injuries were legitimate, if the injuries are a byproduct of preparation, conditioning, and being committed to the process of being ready for football on Sundays, that was never going to fly well with this coaching staff. 1,000% was never going to fly right. Now, the one other thing that I'm going to point out here, and we'll continue to look at, you better believe it. You better believe it, Ross. You better believe it, man. In Joe Schoen and Brian Dable, we trust. And listen, again, blind faith is not something I think you should ever put in anything. However, I'm willing to, as I was when Dave Gettleman became the GM, right? When he was drafting Saquon Barkley second overall, I didn't immediately go, what a disaster. I said, now that isn't where I would have gone at the second overall pick, but electric talent. Let's get him in the building. He's a giant now. Let's go, right? Same thing with Daniel Jones, sixth overall pick. One of my biggest emotional regrets is that over the course of Daniel Jones' tenure, he came in. They drafted him sixth overall. I went, looked at the tape, and I said, listen, I like this kid. He's mobile. Guy got a good deep ball, right? And then the slow descent into madness starts to unravel as the franchise is struggling. We'll continue to watch and see how Daniel Jones grows here. The other thing that I was thinking about, though, you can't, as Mike see, I'll just touch on this real quick. You can't install Maserati parts on a Ford pickup. Now, am I reading the tea leaves correctly here, Mike, that you're suggesting you cannot utilize Kadarius Toney in this team right now because they are a Ford pickup? They are reliable. They're getting you to your destination and getting wins. And a dynamic playmaker like that requires something else, requires a quarterback of a certain level, or requires a scheme of a certain level. If that's the case, and it's fine if I'm off base here, I would disagree with the fact that we know what the system is capable of with Dable and with Kafka. So the buy-in is important. If you're a Maserati, then if you have a Maserati, it's hard to be driving yourself. Kadarius Toney needs to know, yeah, I can beat anybody off the line. You want to pay for pink slips? You want to go for pink slips? Let's do it. Put them on the dash. But I also need to know that this car has to drive me around town, that this car has to get me to the store and back. And if I'm not willing to do the day trips, to get the chores done, I don't get to go for joyrides on the weekend. That to me, whether or not that was the intention of it, that's where I'm going to take it. You can be an elite electric talent, but if you're not willing to put in the dirty work, you're going to have a hard time being successful with consistency on teams that are threading this needle of winning games and also being productive. Let's get in here with Ross, who asked, do you think we should trade for a wide receiver this year? What about trading for a tight end? Yeah. When we talk about these two things, so they have the draft capital now, what can it mean for the Giants? And they've added to it. Are they going to go to the next level? Again, I continue to believe that marginal moves are the goal here for the New York Football Giants. And what I mean by that is just, it doesn't need to be that you go all in on DJ Moore. Now, in Joe Schoen we trust, as we say. If you choose to make that all-in push, it's going to elevate my expectations, and it's going to elevate what I think the organization feels about this season and what they can accomplish. To me, I think that it will be interesting which wide receivers we hear rumors about and who they maybe ultimately end up targeting. Jordan Renan is saying here, this now makes a move for a wide receiver before the trade deadline more likely for the Giants. Brian Dable just spoke, but didn't add much on the situation other than this trade was completed minutes ago. Quote, we just thought it was for the best of the team, Dable said. So again, I know we're thinking you put ammo in the arsenal and you can go do something with this. I'm not sure about that. It may just be that we're done with Kadarius Toney and we don't want it to linger beyond the trade deadline this year. We'd rather get value now and be done with it. Move on from this process, move on from the experimentation, and move on from off-season conjecture. And even this season, will he get back out there? Will he be able to play? Will he be able to contribute? And then after this season, what's the outlook for Kadarius Toney? Could he possibly be traded, right? I think, again, ultimately, as I just check in here to make sure that I'm not missing anything, as I check in, nothing new. But a new regime is not beholden to the costs and expenses of the previous regime. Shy of saying, I don't get to just take your bill and tear it up. I don't get to go to Dave Gettleman and go, well, you certainly ran this into the ground. We'll go ahead and take all the dead cap and all the salaries that we don't like, and we'll just shuffle them out the window and we can reset. Sorry, that's not the way the NFL works, as we all know. But your decision-making process does not need to be tied to the decisions of the previous regime and the commitments of the previous regime. I'm seeing some things about Kenny Golladay in here as well. Curious to see. I'm trying to get a sense of it. Got Donnie agreeing. Giants training staff is a joke. So we got 801 talking about it. We can throw this up there. Training staff is a joke. Most injured team in the NFL since 2009 in terms of games, man games lost, right? Say what you want about Tony's motivation or toughness. Kid can flat out play. Again, I agree. He can flat out play. I don't think that his injuries have anything to do with the training staff, though. I don't. I disagree that it has to do with it. We've talked before about the turf. We've talked before about field conditions. We've talked about, turning over an organization and making sure you have the best medical staff and the best training staff possible. If I'm going to sit here and say that there's a problem with the training staff, even though Sterling Shepard goes down on a fluke injury, remember, this is a guy who a year ago maybe wasn't going to be able to make it back. He restructured to stay with the team, to be able to have the training staff there, and was able to get himself back out on the field for the Giants. That to me is, honestly, I can't even speculate on how good or bad it is. I can speculate on hamstring injuries specifically, a history of injuries for Kadarius Toney going back to college, and just saying that's an element of who he is as a player. You're going to have to take the good with the bad in terms of how productive we think he can be at the NFL level versus what the drawbacks are going to be. And by the way, again, I think we're going to see Kadarius Toney out there for the Kansas City Chiefs sooner than later, and I think we're going to see him being incredibly productive. I'm trying to keep an eye on any speculated names that are being thrown out here right now, just in terms of potential targets. Now, I mentioned the tight end there before. If I tap back into that article, and give me 1 second to pull it up here, which was by Bill Barnwell. When we get down into the wide receivers that are being listed, I just want to make sure that we discuss those names and we can take a little bit of a look at them in terms of how they've been productive. I'm seeing in the chat there too. Remember, Jerry Jeudy is not a perfect wide receiver. He has had drop issues. So that's certainly something that you have to consider. The other thing that I want to say here too, we're talking about it being a lock or not for the Giants in the playoffs. Remember, they were a 15.7% preseason chance to make the playoffs. They are now at 91.8%. So not making the playoffs now would be a pretty big disappointment relative to the overall process. Maybe not, but I think the Giants are trying to feather that line. So we go down just into this group here because I wanted to make sure that we got to these. I mentioned Kendrick Bourne. I mentioned Aguilar, mentioned Hamler, mentioned Jeudy. They don't bring up any other specific ones, but if we go over to Judy's numbers as a potential target, Jerry Jeudy for his career right now, get my pulled up here a little bit better. So Jerry Jeudy, 6'1", 193, just to give you the measurables on him. 15th overall pick going back to 2020 for the Denver Broncos. Now remember, played in just 10 games last year. 38 catches on 56 targets, 467. His rookie campaign was his best campaign, 52 for 113, 856 yards. Has 5 total career touchdowns. Big first down production, I'll say, just in terms of being a guy that was a chain mover. When we talk about, 39 first downs in his rookie season on 52 receptions. So being a reliable player that you felt like you could go to and lean on certainly has some value there. But I'm not going to sit here. And by the way, let's go ahead and do the comparison. Let's just tap ourselves into that Panthers and into that DJ Moore conversation and why he's so much more expensive and what that would look like if you're bringing a player like DJ Moore. So over on Moore stat lines, again, 6 foot, actually a little bit taller, a little bit bigger, 210. He would be the preferred, obviously, in this scenario. Now he's been in the league since 2018. And we're talking about 55 for 82 out of 82 for 788 his rookie season. 3 consecutive seasons, 1,100 yards, going from 2019 to 2021. And now he's obviously in his 2022 campaign. 87, 66, and 93 catches, respectively, over that 2019 to 2021 span. 4 touchdowns in all 3 of those seasons, 2 touchdowns so far this year. That middle season, 2020, 1,193 yards, just 66 catches on 118 targets, a reduction there, played in 15 games that season, but 18.1 yards per catch average. The reason why I bring that up is if you have Darius Slayton right now and you were thinking about going after DJ Moore, you can think about just, hey, we know Darius Slayton has his own issues, 5th round selection and where he struggled in his production. However, having him on one side of the field and DJ Moore can play other places, having him on the opposite side, all of a sudden that downfield ability, stretching the field, hitting some big plays, that certainly is something you'd be able to do. Again, I don't see that necessarily being the case. And as you're seeing some people pointing out here, the market is going to be crazy when it comes to DJ Moore and where he's going to be. Because again, already now he's going to be entering into that contract conversation. I can't remember where his was. Let's go ahead and get a look at the Panthers app room here. And we thank you, by the way, for getting in on the action on the live stream here on YouTube, where, of course, you're welcome to get in on the conversation, ask your questions. Sometimes, if you have a specific question, putting in the at One Giant podcast in the chat just helps me draw my eyes to it. But we'll talk about a lot of different elements here, obviously. Reset the table very quickly for anyone coming in. Kadarius Toney traded from the Giants to the Kansas City Chiefs. Conditional third, sixth round pick. Joe Schoen makes his first significant move on this roster in terms of trading away high draft asset, first round pick just a year ago. Finds himself a new home and what we would think will be a very productive transition for Kadarius Toney. All right, on the DJ Moore contract side of things, 25 years old, free agency will be in 2026 for him. The contract number is always there. So this is like worth maybe just thinking about. The Giants are going to have money to spend. There's a couple of factors here, but just in 2022, it's the $6 million hit. Most of that will already be taken care of, obviously, at this point of the season, just if you were going to do it. But then going into next year, what do you end up suffering? $4.8 million for the Carolina Panthers in dead money if you trade him over the life of this contract. And then $20 million would be the cap savings. Next year, 2023 is $25 million, and then $20 million in the two following seasons, 24 and 25. Now, in theory, you can say we know that we have money coming to us. Let's just assume that you can make all the money work and get this done. In theory, you could say that 25 and 20 million actually could end up being okay in the spectrum of the market. Here's why I don't like that, though. And Andy has used this a couple of times going back to the start of this season, and it didn't work out this way, and I'm not begrudging my co-host for it. But he talked about Kenny Golladay and saying, well, ultimately, though, if Kenny can even be somewhat close to what he was in Detroit, the value of his contract relative to the market is not so bad. But guess what? He hasn't been productive. Hadn't even been on the field. So you can't look at it in that same way. DJ Moore, you wouldn't expect that he's going to drop off a cliff because he's so much younger. Maybe there's value there at $20 million. I still like the idea of going to the draft and bringing in young talent, understanding that, potentially this offseason, you got to make hard choices. Daniel Jones, not even if you love him, you want to keep him. Okay, great. What are you going to pay him? Got a lot of cap room. You're going to have to pay him. You want to franchise tag Saquon Barkley for a year, $12 million? Okay, go ahead and do that. But you still want to add pieces to this team. Julian Love. What's that going to look like? He's been more productive. What's next for him? You're only another year away from having discussions around Xavier McKinney. One of the biggest failings of previous regimes of Dave Gettleman was making choices that were looking for immediate success and being blinded to what it was going to cost you 1, 2, 3, and 4 years down the road. That's not something that Joe Schoen is going to make that mistake. I do not believe. Yeah, and I know, yes, Ronnie's pointing out Moore has an out of his contract in 2024, and I think, let me see, DJ Moore signed a 3-year contract worth $61.8 million with the Panthers, $41.61 million fully guaranteed, including $19.5 million in signing bonus. Moore will receive a $1 million bonus if he's on the roster on the 5th day of the 2025 year. And I think actually that I'm over the cap right now, but I believe that when we go to Spot Track, they do sometimes they do a nice job of providing a little extra context here. I'm not seeing anything else over here, though. Potential out 2024, 2-year, $40.9 million, $10.86 million in dead cap hit, though. So how all that breaks out would obviously be a factor, too. And again, like this is my other thing as well. After next season, it's the problem would be DJ Moore may say, why am I going to honor this contract? I want to get back into it. The team may say, well, in theory, we can go all in here and still have a relative out in the near future. But I think whatever move the Giants are trying to make here, they're trying to make sustained moves. If it's going to be Daniel Jones, they want the chemistry and the rapport with the wide receiver rooms and the running backs to be consistent going forward. So I think that that's a big part of what we're talking about here as well. And here's a good one, actually, too. Let's talk about this. Because DJ Moore, again, we're talking about it because it's been brought up, but I mostly don't care in particular about that part of the conversation because I think it's a pipe dream and I would not be fully in support of that move. The other player, though, that Cy is bringing up is a guy like Chase Claypool. Now, I was, as Andy mentioned the other day, such a massive fan of Claypool in the draft when he was coming out. Just to put it into a little bit of context, there's players that I miss or hit on when it comes to the draft and guys that I like. The one thing that I'll tell you is that over the past few years, I've done a pretty good job when it comes to wide receivers. The two that come instantly to mind here, and there is another one that's escaping me right now. Chase Claypool was one of them, and originally he was coming out and kind of getting earmarked with a third-round draft pick. The Steelers got him a lot sooner, and that was based on the trajectory of where he was going to go and what the talent could be. Likewise, I was a massive, massive, massive fan of Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I thought that he was someone the Giants should have been looking at, should have been targeting, and should have been going after. We've seen what he's done so far in Detroit. I think that he is a productive player. So I've had some success looking at the wide receivers and trying to get an idea of if I think that they can translate and develop. Now, Chase Claypool is certainly a little bit more of a raw talent when he was coming out. His free agency is going to be unrestricted in 2024. And to this point right now, and why you might like a move like this, is that his cap number is going to be, it's a 1.8 this year, 2.1 next year. That's the kind of move you can get a little bit more excited about because you know that it's not a big risk financially in the short term to take a look at a player like this. And by the way, he's giving you 62 for 873. He's giving you 59 for 860. And he's currently running on a 28 for 266 this season. Big benefit for the Giants, if you're looking over at the Steelers, is, hey, here's a guy and a team that they got Kenny Pickett. They're not sure which direction they're going. They obviously also have other talent in that room already in terms of their wide receivers. So you have a little bit more flexibility. When we talk about the depth chart for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you have Chase Claypool. You now have George Pickens in there, though, as well. You now have Deontay Johnson in there as well. We also know that they have Freiermuth, who's dealt with some injuries this year. But you have a lot of weapons. It's just about how long is it going to take. And if you don't think you're planning on spending the money another year from now in the offseason on Chase Claypool, why not get value? My question would be, what's the price point? 2020 second round pick, pick 49 overall. If you're telling me, let's do the board, right? If you're telling me that DJ Moore is 2 first-round picks, thanks so much. I'll see you later. And the price tag, let alone, right? The financial commitment associated. Now, let's say that Jerry Jeudy, they're saying is a second-round pick. Now, for me personally, I think that I would rather have Chase Claypool than Jerry Jeudy. But if Claypool is perceived as a better talent right now in this moment than Jerry Jeudy or on par, is it worth a second-round pick? That's interesting to me. That's an interesting question about commitment. Now, I said it earlier. If you get that extra compensatory or conditional third, for Kadarius Toney, and now you have 2 threes and you want to give up your 2, remember, as it stands right now, the Giants are likely to make the playoffs. That already is going to put you in the back end of the second round. If you win a playoff game, that's going to move you a little bit further. So if you're talking about giving up the 20-something pick in the second round for Chase Claypool, I might still say that that's a little bit too, that might be a little too steep. I might rather give a third that I got in the trade. I'll tell you what I would do. I'll give you the 3 and the 6 that I just got for Kadarius Toney and throw them right over to you. I would sign up for that. Get in the comments on that. Would you flip the immediate draft capital you just got into a Chase Claypool? And other names could come up in this conversation, but would you immediately take that draft capital and say, what did we do? We took a player that wasn't on the field for us and wasn't a part of our future. We moved him and we turned him immediately into this wide receiver. We turned him into Chase Claypool, and we didn't hurt our draft capital at all. We're right where we were on Thursday. On Thursday, We had Kadarius Toney and the draft assets that we had. On Thursday afternoon, we had the same draft assets and Chase Claypool. That's a move that I can get behind. And I agree with you, Cy, right? That second for him is going to be a lot. But if I can flip the capital I just got, and I'll even go a step further, if I could flip it and say it has to be a 3 and a 5, maybe, right? There'll be flexibility for me. If I can stay out of the second round, I think that probably would be my big sticking point. I don't want to go into the second round. That's real talent, right? Third round as well, but that's real talent. John Doe talking about right here. We turned the 17th overall pick into a third and a sixth. It's still a loss, particularly if Toney actually takes the field for KC. It's a loss as fans of the team in perpetuity. It's a loss because you're analyzing what it was when he was drafted. That's not what I'm doing. I'm using Joe Schoen's mentality. I didn't draft him. I didn't spend the capital. I don't care. I don't care what his status was at the time that he was drafted. That's Dave Gettleman's problem. My problem is making this team better. And what he turns in the third round pick into, what he turns that sixth round pick into, that's how you're going to judge it. And on top of which, as we're seeing, how is he a loss if he didn't play? The potential is there. And by the way, this isn't about right now in this regime. This is about the previous regime. You made a mistake drafting a first-round wide receiver that wasn't able to be on the field and be productive for you. So the mistake's already been made. There's no reason to, and we talk about this all the time, don't compound a bad mistake by doubling down on it, right? Doubling down on it would be, let's extend Kadarius Toney. He's an electric talent. Once we get him healthy, he's going to be out there. No. You go back into the draft, you go around later, you get a player that you think can be a replacement for him in Wan'Dale Robinson, and then you find a way to recoup previous regime's losses and set yourself up for success. Yeah, and I'll just reiterate here. Do they free up any cap space? The exact numbers of how this fleshes out, and we'll try to take a look here because Jordan Renan, great coverage of the New York Football Giants. He may be doing some work here as far as where the financials fall. As it stands right now, though, it's primarily just about the fact first round pick last year, 41 catches, 420 yards, no touchdowns, missed 12 of 24 career games, currently dealing with a hamstring injury. That is per the Jordan Schultz report. And we're going to go ahead and just tap into this again here and see if they outline this. But it was a 1.8 draft cap hit, 1.2 dead cap. Where those numbers are because you're already into the season, so some of that money has been spent. We'll have to clarify that. Yes, the Giants will get some cap room relief here, but it's not going to be significant. I would love a Jerry Jeudy trade. We need a solid wide receiver one option for DJ, and at the very least, a good second number 2 cornerback in case Foster gets hurt. Yeah, well, here's the thing too. The other side of this that we haven't even scratched the surface of, and what a perfectly timed one here. Is there a coverage linebacker on the trade market? And this is the other point to make. So, look at what the Giants have accomplished to this point of the season. Would we prefer that the wide receiver room was healthier? Yes. Would we prefer that they had more dynamic playmakers? Sure. However, Wan'Dale Robinson's getting out there on the field. Darius Slayton is working himself back into it. Richie James, for whatever his ceiling is, has been playing a little bit more consistently. But playing consistently all season. And even though you did lose Daniel Bellinger, maybe there's a marginal move you make there. But the reality is, if I'm thinking about where I want to add talent, I'm actually also looking at the defensive side of the ball and reminding us, hey, we got rid of Blake Martinez. We lost Darian Beavers to injury. We've seen a cast of characters come through that inside linebacker position. If you can get something in that middle linebacker room, in the inside linebacker room, a coverage, as you're mentioning, that could be important. If you can add maybe a secondary player in the secondary to help bolster the depth there, that can matter. Azeez Ojulari is dealing with his injuries right now. He should be back after being on the 4-week IR. But we know, right? Oshane Ximines has been dealing with it. Kayvon Thibodeau had to deal with it early on. Looks like how we lost Leonard Williams for a stretch. Knock on wood, we've had a healthy Dexter Lawrence all year and has been playing max reps and balling out. But maybe even adding an extra body there, someone who can get after the quarterback as well, right? Like all these things matter. All of these things matter. And the other component of this, so we'll talk about. I'll take a look at this. Maybe I'll come back in later today because I want to give it the due diligence that it deserves as far as names that could be out there and players that could be targeted. I did, by the way, though. There's a couple that I can touch on here, but it's as much about the totality of adding talent to this team overall, and there is a little bit of what I don't know what's up with Kenny Golladay. Could be the same exact set of circumstances, and if not for the cap hit, he would have already been gone. Entirely possible. Maybe he does get back out there at some point. Maybe, and I've been as critical of him and of that signing going back to the previous regime as anyone, but maybe there's an opportunity there that he just gets out there and shows you something on the back end of this season. There are needs here, and I might lean even a little bit deeper into an area that I think could use some bolstering and could use some reinforcements, and in some ways trust. If we think that Daniel Jones is growing into this offensive system, if we think that Wan'Dale Robinson adds an element, we know we have Saquon Barkley, and the offensive line is improving, there's a value here. And there's only going to be one or two marginal moves that can get made because they don't have the cap room and they don't want to give up the assets. So that's the question there as well. I saw somebody here, not that I want to dwell on anything too drastic here. Yeah, Saga. Yeah. Thank you, Saga. Yeah. Take it, right? Again, and just Showtime, just quickly here. Ridiculous to give up on the talent Toney flashed for a 3rd and 6th. It's all in the eye of the beholder. By the way, and then we talked about this too at the time that Joe Schoen came in as the GM. And then I want to highlight a couple of guys that did come to mind in the cornerback room, specifically off the Houston Texans. Don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast prior. When Joe Schoen worked in Buffalo, he saw it. He scouted the talent. So when he came into this regime, especially for recent players drafted by the Giants and by Dave Gettleman, where were my notes on him? What did I view him as a prospect coming out? Did I have him graded higher or lower where Dave Gettleman and the Giants took him before I got here? Would I have drafted him at all, whether it was later, right? Those things matter as well. So again, I understand the idea of giving up, quote unquote, on a talent, but you're in the second year and it's a new regime. And I don't want to belabor that point. So I get the frustration in terms of the talent that he could be. But again, talent is only talent if you're out there proving it. I saw an agreement here. Well, by the way, smart, tough, dependable. That is the credo of Brian Daboll and the New York Football Giants. Smart, tough, dependable. Now, again, when guys are injured, you're injured. No one's going to balk at that. But are you doing everything possible to be out there with your team and contributing? Dependable, regardless of whether or not you're doing everything from a toughness standpoint. Flat out, can you be available? If you can't, you can't. And by the way, a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson, who this regime did draft, he has to prove that over the remainder of this season and into next season and over the life of his rookie contract, right? Hey, you're smart. You're tough. The kid is tough. I mean, he's small and undersized and gets beat up and he stays out there. But are you going to be dependable? Or are these injuries going to affect your ability to be the best version of yourself? That's the difference. No, and these ones are like, so Moore's not going anywhere. They seem like they have effectively said that when he has complaints. Now, Mims will be a different one. Andy's mentioned him as maybe being a target. It's not an issue. It's not an issue, but I'll say it's an issue. My only concern there is, again, giving up draft capital for somebody that hasn't shown anything yet. Like if I'm going to give something up, and that's the Jerry Jeudy piece. Jerry Jeudy is not 15th overall pick in the first round talent based on what we've seen so far. Chase Claypool has shown that the value of a second round pick, yeah, he's shown that he is that thing. He can be that for you, right? Yeah, there's another good one too. We'll stay on the wide receivers here for a second. I just read about him in Carolina with the interim head coach Wilkes saying how he's going to be more involved going forward. Now, two parts to that because we have talked about DJ Moore. If DJ Moore isn't going anywhere, then trading Terrence Marshall, if you're the Carolina Panthers, can make sense. However, if DJ Moore could be on the market, trying to see if Terrence Marshall can be a part of what you do in your rebuild, that's going to be something too, right? So yeah, but no, definitely another good name to watch here. I want to get into the secondary conversation here for a second, but we should have gotten a second for around for Tony. Well, again, we won't belabor this, but yeah, I should have. Okay, but if no one's offering, it's, by the way, goes back to the draft when I said Giants are picking at 5 and 7. Now I'm happy with Kayvon Thibodeau. I'm happy with Evan Neal, but I said I think the Giants wanted to trade down from one of those positions depending on what they got at 5, make a move at 7, or vice versa, what have you, however the board played out. Only works if someone's offering you. Only works if someone's offering you the trade down. So getting more for Kadarius Toney only works if you're getting more. This is another good question here because Roquan obviously it could potentially be out there. We just saw Quinn get traded there. Let's get a peek at Roquan Smith, who's been talked about obviously before here in terms of the Giants and adding some talent. But again, capital is going to be a part of that as well, and that's really what it's going to come down to. So Roquan Smith is currently on the final year of his deal. 9.735 on the cap. And the problem's going to be, what is the cost? So again, when you think about these players and guys you want to go out, you want to go out and get, it's too now they did it. Now here's a good example. Here's a good example of Dave Gettleman doing something that people were curious about and ultimately worked out for the Giants. And that was trading for Leonard Williams, right? You went out, you spent that money in a bad season when you were losing, and it was, oh, good Lord, like what's going to happen here? What ended up? They brought him back on the new contract. He's been a great player for the Giants, and that has been effective. So if you want to go make a trade for Roquan Smith because you think he can be a part of what you're going to do going forward for the organization, I can get behind that. We all know, just 25 years old, right? So certainly that's an option. But again, knowing that he's an unrestricted free agent, it's also this is the chicken or the egg. You want to make the move now, and this is the exact thing they did with Leonard Williams. Why don't you just wait and go get him on the free agency market? Is there a guarantee that he's going to choose you over someone else? If you get him in the building, you let him be a part of it, maybe you set that in place for it to be successful. Simmons, I can't see in Arizona. Too young, too talented right now. I know that team isn't playing particularly well. The defense has played really well for them. Go check out the Kickoff in the Valley podcast. Tyler Vasquez, Gunnar Jackson, they covered that team and do a really good job of it. That's not a team that's at a spot where they're going to start shedding young talent like that. You got to be a team with a new regime that wants to maybe make some changes around personnel that fits their scheme better. But Simmons, yes, certainly. And again, you don't have, as Tommy's pointing out here, the capital. I'm not targeting anybody that's costing me first-round draft capital. Not happening. Flat out, I'll tell you that right now. And I'm sure there'll be a guy you could throw out and I'd say, well, if we're talking about him. But by and large, I am not spending draft capital that high for players to be brought in here, especially ones that have money already attached to them, especially ones that you're going to have to re-sign potentially in the offseason. All right, let's take a little look here. Keep the conversation going in the side. But I want to just, what I want to do is just pull up the handful of players that I was taking a look at going back a couple of weeks now and just thinking about where can we reasonably look to bring in some talent. First part is, who are guys that are going to be willing to jettison, right? The AFC East is still competitive, even down to New England at this point. They're 3-4. They're probably just 1 week away and one loss away from pulling the plug. So you can keep your eyes on them for sure. Pittsburgh is in that mix. Cleveland is not going to probably do anything dramatic because Deshaun Watson is just around the bend. So, where's the push and pull there? 2-5 is obviously a really hard mountain to climb. But I think, I don't know, even at 2-6, would they still hang on there? It'll be interesting because you have Cincinnati again. Talk about the AFC and wild cards. Well, wild cards right now are going to be the Chargers at 4-3, the Bengals at 4-3, and the Jets at 5-2, right? So you can at least one more week probably before you push it. Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be willing. Obviously, we saw that with Robinson, Denver Broncos, and then even the Las Vegas Raiders pushed that button when it came to Jonathan Hankins. They're 2-4, though. I wouldn't count them totally out. That can be as much about, again, finances and where you're headed as it is about the player and a new coach, new regime. So there's always going to be personnel turnover in that regard. Out there in Houston, the players that I had talked about here, looking over this roster, let's just go into the secondary first here to start, because I think that a player in the secondary that I would be excited to go take a flyer on is not going to be Isaac Yiadom, who has been on this team, by the way. But I will go take a look at a player like Desmond King. Desmond King on the season right now has 29 total tackles, 25 solos, 4 assists, 1 interception, and 7 pass deflections on the year. We know, as we always say, that it is not just about PFF by any stretch of the imagination. However, I am going to tell you that if you go look at Desmond King, and I did this the other day, his PFF grade, and then you also get the little supplemental stats just in terms of what he's done over the past couple of seasons. Right now, he's playing at a 76.5 this season. Last year, it was just a 53. Had 3 picks, though. Gave up 63 receptions on 91 targets. Go back to 2020, a 65.5 PFF grade. And again, 37 receptions on 50 targets. Didn't have any interceptions in that particular season. Veteran, experienced, 70.9 going back to 2019 as well. Veteran, experienced cornerback, 5'10", 5th round pick that is well outperformed. He's 28 years old. And once again, when we talk about where his contract is going to be, this is why it's another viable one. I think he may have 1 year after this one, if I'm remembering correctly. And we'll just get a quick check at it here. But it's an incredibly low cost. There's not a lot to worry about in terms of the money that you'd be dedicating to him. He is on, yes, so he'll have this year and next year. And this year's cap, it was 2.5. Next year's is 4.4 million. Again, if you project to the off season and what he is going to, what you're going to have from a cap room standpoint, at 29 years old and 4.4 million, there are far worse options that you could have on your roster as a veteran secondary player that could be out there. He could be overtaken by another cornerback that you draft next year, and he can just be someone who's versatile and can supplement your secondary. To get Allen from the Jags? No. That's not happening. That's not happening. And I'm not, dismissing you for asking the question, but that's not happening. That's not what this is, right? That is not the moves that are going to get made here. That's an interesting one. I don't know, where is his, this is a good question to ask. Where is his contract right now? By the way, thank you again, everybody. Reset the table. Kadarius Toney, traded from the New York Football Giants, 6th round pick, conditional 3rd round pick to the Kansas City Chiefs. Dynamic, potential playmaker, when on the field and healthy. If healthy and on the field for the Kansas City Chiefs, is going to be dynamic for Mahomes. It's going to help them compete with the likes of the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs this year. However, wasn't going to do it for the New York Football Giants and this new regime. Over the cap. We've got voidable year in 2025. He is on a $13 million, $28 million next year. That one at 30 years old is going to be a hard pass for me. So there you go. I don't hate you bringing it up. See what sticks, because at the right age and price point, you might be able to grab a guy like that and be in a rebuilding team. However, age combined with money, no way that I can do that. Yeah, and listen, and Marty's saying about staying healthy, but again, I'm not. Again, I'm not looking at a 30-year-old, $28 million wide receiver. I've already boondoggled that once as the Giants franchise with Kenny Galladay, right? Big money, older receiver, injury concerns, obviously. Darius Slayton, Richie James, Marcus Johnson, David Sills, Matt Breida, Saquon Barkley, Tanner Hudson. All we need is for them to catch it when it comes their way. I don't hate this. Like this is my point. Again, going back to what Daniel Jones needs or what this team needs, I don't hate that mentality. I think that that's the right mentality. Things have gotten progressively better. Guys have had ups and downs. We get that. But guess what? Some of the guys have shown up in big moments too. Excuse me for one moment. Whew. That's live. That's live on YouTube, friends, but I muted it for you. I didn't want to blast out your eardrums. Darius Slayton stepped up in that, for 1 week, he stepped up and got it done for you. Another week, rookie Daniel Bellinger steps up and gets it done. First game back, Wan'Dale Robinson flashes, gets a touchdown, gets it done. And Marcus Johnson got it done 1 week. Following weeks, drops, of course. Of course they've had them. But that's the way it is. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, everybody. It's I got the windows open, a little bit warm out today, right? It's like seasonal allergies are making a revenge tour before the winter comes. But that's, I think, again, the mentality of this organization. That's what it's about. It's about looking at the talent that you have and understand. This is what I said about David Sills, right? I don't bash David Sills because he drops passes or he slips and falls on an interception against the Dallas Cowboys, right? I don't knock him because he's a back-end wide receiver and a practice squad guy. There has to be expectations, right? This is a good one though too. If the Bucks lose, then what? The only thing about this, when it comes to the Bucks, I would say, is that if they lose, I don't know. Like they may be losing and saying, we're not going to win this year, and Tom Brady might be done, but we're still a really good team. And what might we do in the offseason to drop someone into this roster at quarterback and still go on to have some success? I don't know what which quarterback that's going to be or what that's going to look like. There was somebody who even talked about, by the way. Mike Evans. Yeah, and then just to that point, Corey, there could be pieces that they would move. I'd be hard pressed to think that they would move any of the big pieces, or especially again that the Giants would be in on those conversations. Let's have fun with it. Let's have fun with it. That's what we're here for. Let's take a look at the cap room situation for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and specifically at a man like Mike Evans. I need some interlude music. Okay, Mike Evans, who has a void year in 2024. He currently sits at, so again, now here's the interesting thing for me would be voidable year in 2024, 23 million next year, 10 million now on the books this season. Again, wow, Mike Evans, how about this? Here's one for you. Mike Evans is 30. Yeah, I mean, great job, Dowd. Mike Evans is 30 years old. That's fascinating. Mike Evans, before our very eyes, became an older veteran wide receiver. It's absolutely insane. But yeah, I don't think, again, I don't think that is these higher profile guys. I don't think, unless the asking price is significantly lower. So just using Mike Evans as the example, again, the cap number next year deters Joe Schoen probably from wanting to make that commitment. But if the ask is not a first round pick, if the ask is not even a second round pick, again, then maybe it's worth it to have that conversation. So there's a little bit of that, kind of getting a sense of like, where is this market? DJ Moore being kind of the unicorn on the market right now, because you're talking about a guy that is young, that is proven, and that has big money on his contract, right? So you are talking about having to spend big money because the talent is there at the right spot, the right age. Chase Claypool, shown that he's talented, but he's not an elite, right? Not an elite number one guy. So does the asking price come down a little bit? So the Giants traded a first round pick for a third round pick. Yeah, listen, I know. And feel free. Everyone feel free to vent. We get it. We get it. Yeah, no, and by the way, Robert's saying it's really a fourth, 100%. But it's really not. Again, it's just not something to dwell on. I'm going to put it that way. We're going to start to wrap this bad boy up. Since it's almost 2:30 in the afternoon, we've run this thing for almost an hour and a half. We'll reset the table here quickly. Yeah, Renfro for a second again. Right team in terms of the Raiders. Team that's going in the wrong direction here. A team that has a new head coach there, maybe wants to look to turn some things over as they head towards the offseason, get some extra capital in the door for themselves. I see. I again though, I don't know. Like I like that Renfro's only 27. His void year comes in 2025. He's on the books next year for 13.7. I don't hate that. Like I don't hate that number. You could probably live with that. And obviously you feel like you're getting a guy at 5'10, 180, the mold of that type of player that you want to have there. Asking price on that would be interesting. Asking price on that would be interesting. Again, second round pick for a guy that I may only have for a year and a half, too much for me. And at his age, Chase Claypool, I can go get, and then I could say, and my intention is to re-sign you, re-up you here at the right price point as well. So there's a little bit of conversation there. I might prefer it, for a third round pick. Maybe I actually go down that road a little bit further with Renfro. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on as well. But again, by and large, to tie a bow on it, friends, at the end of the day, as we normally say on the podcast, yes, they did. They traded Kadarius Toney. To tie a bow on it, New York Football Giants and the new regime trade the previous regime's first round draft pick Kadarius Toney to the Kansas City Chiefs for a conditional third rounder and a sixth round pick, officially cutting ties with one member of the Dave Gettleman draft class. In turn, the Giants have draft capital, and I do not know how eager they are going to be to spend what they've just gotten back or anything else to go and improve this roster. I think they'll make moves in the margins. I think they'll trade some late draft round capital. And there's probably other guys out here. Right? When someone throws out Hunter Renfro, it raises your eyebrow. The price is not north of 20 million. It's closer to 10 than 20. You can get out of it in a year. What is the asking price, right? At the right asking price, might make sense to fit him in here. I keep going back to Josh Reynolds or someone in that vein, because I think you're talking about a 6th or 7th round pick at most to get them, and they provide you with some production and consistency. So I think that's really where my target room goes. Likewise can be said for the tight end group. Likewise for the cornerback room. Inside linebacker is the one spot where if the player is right, the Giants may be willing to spend a little bit more, because you're talking about a player that can be a part of the future, as I said before, a la Leonard Williams, maybe. The only problem, and so far, Robert, we don't have any update on we don't have any update on what it means for the conditions of the third round draft pick. So we'll take a look at it. By the way, just if here's what I'll say it's going to be. Here's the way conditional picks usually work. If Kadarius Toney gets out there and is productive and catching passes and maybe touchdowns, that's going to factor into it. I won't be shocked if that 3 can become a 2 based on what happens with Kadarius Toney. And in the grand scheme of things, this may be a short-term, long-term option that the Chiefs are taking a shot on here, as in, let's make sure that he's healthy. Let's get him built up. Let's get him comfortable in the system, and let's not worry about unleashing him until week 15, week 14, whatever it looks like, where you dodge the conditions of that third round pick potentially elevating, and by that, reducing what you're going to pay out for Kadarius Toney and then still having him going forward. So it could end up being a very smart move by the Kansas City Chiefs. What's going to end up happening here, and I'll get to Brendan Cooks here in a second, but what's going to end up happening here, at least in my opinion, is, remember, when we take a look over at the standings, the Kansas City Chiefs are 5-2 with the Chargers right behind them. So what happens over the next 2, 3, 4 games is going to could potentially dictate how soon we see Kadarius Toney and how soon we see the potential for that trigger of whatever conditions may be. One thing to note, though, the Chargers right now are a minus 25 on point differential. In spite of the fact that they're 4-3, the Raiders, by the way, are 2-4 in spite of a plus 13 point differential. And those numbers are relative to games and getting blown out or not. But how that division plays itself out could be the impetus for how urgently the Kansas City Chiefs look to integrate and get Kadarius Toney out there and potentially impact what that capital looks like. Last note, I had seen this before. I don't know the exact numbers. I just know that Brandon Cooks makes a lot of money, and that would not be an option that I would think that they would go down. Yeah, and 100%, just to also remember, yes, comparing him to Tyreek Hill, exactly. That's why they're making the move. You get the ball in his hands in a lot of different ways, and you let him go and cook for you. All right. That being the case, my friends, it's the first of what could be some other moves here. I think that I won't be shocked if this ends up being, as we block some incredibly inappropriate stuff in the chat. I apologize for that if anyone's seeing it, and we will try to, of course, get rid of it as quickly and as timely as we possibly can. But ultimately, we'll see what happens here. I think there can be moves made in the margins for the New York Football Giants and for Joe Schoen. And tomorrow, which, by the way, man, Giants still have a game just 3 days away here against the Seattle Seahawks, excuse me. So we're going to talk about that matchup tomorrow. I'm going to step away, take a look at linebackers, take a look at cornerbacks, maybe even going deeper on the wide receiver room, tight ends, right? Come back in maybe later today with another live episode where we kind of discuss who are some low-cost options here, what are some of the rumors we're hearing about teams that could be looking to move off of players, and even maybe, just maybe, getting some sense across the NFL landscape about how interested the Giants are in making a potential move here, right? That is going to be the discussion that we will continue, whether it's today or going into tomorrow and all the way to the trade deadline. But if something's going to happen, you would assume that this is going to happen a little bit sooner than later, obviously. And we can debate, obviously, and we'll come back in there and have a discussion around which positions are the most critical to add for this team to have success. We thank everybody, man. Over at one point, up over 300 people in here in the live chat, live viewing. Really, really appreciate it. We always, as we say, appreciate you being a part of the live streams. Appreciate you being supporters of the One Giant podcast on YouTube, where you can subscribe on your podcast feed, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. As Andy Makowitz would always say, until next time, let's go Big Blue. And I know it's a little bit out of order here, but again, really, really appreciate everyone being here. Cannot say it enough. Cannot thank it enough. So let's, got to go watch the Locked On crossover. Throw Locked On Seahawks. Yeah, no, listen, they're great stuff. Patricia Trania does great coverage of the Giants as well, and she has some great insider information. So definitely go and enjoy them. You guys be great. You have a great rest of your Thursday. We'll be back in with all the latest news and notes for the New York Football Giants. Until next time, officially, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know. As always, let's go Big Blue.